Cincinnatus got up, made a running start, and smashed headlong into the wall. The real Cincinnatus, however, remained sitting at the table, staring at the wall, chewing his pencil, and presently shuffled his feet under the table and continued to write a little less rapidly. Save these jottings. I do not know whom I ask, but save these jottings. I assure you that such a law exists. Look it up, you will see. Let them lie around for a while. How can that hurt you? And I ask you so earnestly, my last wish, how can you not grant it? I must have at least the theoretical possibility of having a reader, otherwise, really, I might as well tear it all up. There, that is what I needed to say. Now it is time to get ready. He paused again. It had already grown quite light in the cell, and Cincinnatus knew by the position of the light that 5:30 was about to strike. He waited until he heard the distant ringing, and went on writing, but now quite slowly and haltingly, just as if he had spent all his strength on the same initial exclamation. My worlds all mill about in one spot, wrote Cincinnatus, envious of poets. How wonderfully it must be to speed along a page and night from the passage where only a few shadows continue to run, taking off into the blue. The untidiness, sloppiness of an execution, all the manipulations before and after. How cold the blade, how smooth the axe's grip, with emery paper. I suppose the pain of parting will be read and loud. The thought, when written down, becomes less oppressive, but some thoughts are like a cancerous tumor. You express it, you excite it, and it goes back worse than before. It is hard to imagine that this very morning, in an hour or two, but 2 hours passed and more, and just as always Rodion brought breakfast, tidied the cell, sharpened the pencil, removed the clothes stool, fed the spider. Cincinnatus did not ask him anything, but when Rodion had left, and time dragged on at its customary trot, he realized that once again he had been duped, that he had strained his soul to no purpose, and that everything had remained just as uncertain, viscous, and senseless as before. The clock had just finished striking there, 3 or 4. He had dozed off and half awakened, and so had not counted the strokes, but had only retained an approximate impression of their sum of sound, when suddenly the door opened and Martha came in. Her cheeks were flushed, the comb at the back of her head had worked loose, the tight bodice of her black velvet dress was heaving, and something did not fit right, and this made her appear lopsided, and she kept trying to straighten her dress, tugging at it and very rapidly wriggling her hips, as if something underneath were wrong and uncomfortable. Some cornflowers for you, she said, tossing a blue posy upon the table, and at the same time nimbly lifting the hem of her skirt above her knee. She put on the chair a plump little leg in a white stocking, pulling it up to the place where the garter had left its imprint on the tender quivering fat. My, how hard it was to get permission. Of course I had to agree to a little concession. The usual story. Well, how are you, my poor little Sin? I must confess I was not expecting you, said Cincinnatus. Sit down somewhere. I tried yesterday, no luck, and today I said to myself, I'll get through if it's the last thing I do. He kept me for an hour, your director. Spoke very highly of you, by the way. Oh, how I hurried today, how I was afraid that I should be too late. What a mob there was in Thriller Square this morning. Why did they call it off? Asked Cincinnatus. Well, they said everybody was tired, didn't get enough sleep. You know, the crowd simply did not want to leave. You ought to be proud. Oblong, marvelously burnished tears crept down Martha's cheeks and chin, closely following all their contours. One even flowed down her neck as far as the clavicular dimple. Her eyes, however, kept gazing just as roundly. Her short fingers with white spots and nails kept spreading out, and her thin, mobile lips kept emitting words. There are some who insist now that it's been postponed for a long time, and you can't really find out from anyone. You simply cannot imagine all the rumors, the confusion. What are you crying about? Asked Cincinnatus with a smile. I don't know myself. I'm just worn out, in a low, chesty voice. I'm sick and tired of all of you. Cincinnatus, what a mess you have got yourself into. The things people say about you, it's dreadful. Oh, listen, she suddenly began in a different tempo, beaming, smacking her lips, and preening herself. The other day, when was it? A day before yesterday, there comes to me this little dame, a lady doctor or something, a total stranger, mind you, in an awful raincoat, and begins hawing and hemming. Of course, she says, you understand. I says, no, so far as I don't understand anything. She says, oh, I know who you are, you don't know me. I says, Martha, miming her interlocutress, assumed a fussy and fatuous tone, sobbing soberly, soberly, however, on the drawn-out says, and now that she was conveying her own words, she depicted herself as calm as snow. In a word, she tried to tell me that she was your mother, though I think even her age wouldn't be right, and we'll overlook that. She said she was terribly afraid of being persecuted, since you see they had questioned her and subjected her to all sorts of things. I says, What do I have to do with all this, and why should you want to see me? She says, oh yes, I know you're terribly kind. You'll do all you can. I says, what makes you think I'm kind? She says, oh, I know, and asks if I could give her a paper, a certificate that I could sign hand and foot, stating that she had never been at our house and had never seen you. This, seemed funny to Martha, so funny, I think, and drawling, low-pitched voice, that she must have been some kind of crank, a nut, don't you think so? In any case, I of course did not give her anything. Victor and the others said it might compromise me, since it would seem that I knew you every move, and I knew you weren't acquainted with her, so she left very crestfallen, I would say. But it really was my mother, said Cincinnatus. Maybe. After all, it is not important. But tell me, why are you so dull and glum, Cincin? I imagined you would be so happy to see me, but you— she glanced at the cot, then at the door. I don't know what the rules are here, she said under her breath. But if you need it badly, Cincin, go ahead, only do it quickly. Oh, don't! What nonsense, said Cincinnatus. Well, as you please. I only wanted to give you a treat because it's the last interview and all that. Oh, by the way, do you know who wants to marry me? Guess who? You'll never guess. Remember that old grouch who used to live next door to us, who kept stinking in his pipe across the fence and always used to peek when I climbed the apple tree? Can you imagine? And the thing is, he was perfectly serious. Can you see me marrying him, the old scarecrow? Anyway, I feel I had a good long rest, close my eyes, stretch out, not think about anything, and relax, absolutely alone, of course, or else someone who would really care and understand everything. Her short, coarse eyelashes again glistened, and the tears crept down, visiting every dimple on her apple-rosy cheeks. Cincinnatus took one of these tears and tasted it. It was neither salty nor sweet, merely a drop of lukewarm water. Cincinnatus did not do this. Suddenly the door squealed and opened an inch. A red-haired finger beckoned to Martha. She quickly went to the door. Well, what do you want? It isn't time yet, is it? I was promised a whole hour. She whispered rapidly. Something was said in reply. Not on your life, she said indignantly. You can tell him that. The agreement was I should do it only with the direct. She was interrupted. She listened carefully to the insistent mumbling. She looked down, frowning, and scraping the floor of the toe with her slipper. Well, all right, she blurted out, and with innocent vivacity turned to her husband. I'll be back in 5 minutes, Cincin. When she was gone, he thought that not only had he not even begun his urgent talk with her, but now he could no longer formulate those important things. At the same time, his heart was aching, and the same old memories whimpered in a corner, but this time it was time to wean himself from all this anguish. She returned only 3/4 of an hour. Snorting contemptuously, she put one foot on the chair, snapped her garter, and angrily readjusting the pleats below her waist, sat down at the table precisely as she had been sitting before. All for nothing, she said with a sneer, and began fingering the blue flowers on the table. Well, why don't you tell me something, my little Cincin, my cockerel? You know I picked them myself. I don't care for poppies, but these are lovely. Shouldn't I try if you can't manage it? She added unexpectedly in different tone of voice, narrowing her eyes. No, Cincin, I wasn't speaking to you. Sigh. Well, tell me something. Console me. My letter. Did you— began Cincinnatus, then cleared his throat. Did you read my letter carefully? Please, cried Martha, clutching her temples. Let's talk about anything but that letter. No, let's talk about it, said Cincinnatus. She jumped up, spasmodically straightening her dress, and began speaking incoherently, lisping a little as she did when she was angry. That was a horrible letter. That was some kind of delirium. I don't understand it anyway. One might have thought you had been sitting here alone with a bottle and writing. I didn't want to bring up that letter, but now that you— listen, you know the transmitters read it. They copied it. They said to themselves, oh, she must be in cahoots with him if he writes to her like that. Can't you say I don't want to know anything about your affairs? You have no right to send me such letters to drag me into a criminal— I did not write anything criminal, said Cincinnatus. That's what you think, but everyone was horrified by your letters, simply horrified. Me, I'm stupid maybe, but I don't know anything about the laws, but still my instinct told me that every word of yours was impossible, unspeakable. Oh, Cincinnatus, what a position you put me in. All the children— think of the children. Please, listen to me for just a minute. She went on with such an ardor that her speech became quite unintelligible. Renounce everything. Tell them that you are innocent and that you are merely swaggering. Tell them, repent, do it, even if it doesn't save your head. Think of me. Already they are pointing fingers at me and saying, that's her, that's the widow, that's her. Wait, Martha, I don't understand. Repent of what? That's right, mix me up in it. Ask me leading. If I knew all the answers, why then I'd be your accomplice. That's quite obvious. No, enough. I'm dreadfully afraid of all this. Tell me one last time. Are you sure you don't want to repent for my sake, for all your sakes? Goodbye, Martha, said Cincinnatus. She sat down and lapsed into thought, leaning on her right elbow and sketching her world on the table with her left hand. How dreadful, how dull, she said, heaving a deep, deep sigh. She frowned and drew a river with her fingernail. I thought we would meet quite differently. I was ready to give you everything, and this is what I get for my pains. Well, what's done is done. The river flowed into the sea, off the edge of the table. You know I'm leaving with a heavy heart. Yes, but how am I going to get out? She remembered suddenly, innocently and even cheerfully. They won't be coming for me for a while yet. I talked them into giving me oodles of time. Don't worry, said Cincinnatus. Every word we say, they will open it in a moment. He was not mistaken. Bye. Shirt, Martha. Wait, stop pawing me. Let me say goodbye to my husband. Bye. If you need anything in the way of shirts or anything. Oh, yes, the children asked me to give you a big, big kiss. There was something else. Oh, I nearly forgot. Daddy took the wine cup I gave you. He says you promised him. Hurry, little lady, interrupted Rodion, kneeling in a familiar fashion toward the door. 19. Next morning they brought him the newspapers, and this reminded him of the first days of his confinement. He noticed at once the color photograph under a blue sky, the square packed so densely with a motley crowd that only the very edge of the red platform was visible. In the column dealing with the execution, half the lines were blacked out, and out of the remainders, Cincinnatus could finish out only what he knew from Martha, that the maestro was not feeling too well, and that the performance was postponed, possibly for a long time. What a treat you are getting today, said Rodion, not to Cincinnatus, but to the spider. In both hands most carefully, but at the same time squeamishly, care prompted him to press it to his chest. Distaste made him hold it away. He carried a towel gathered together in a lump, in which something large stirred and rustled. Got it on a window pane in the tower. The monster, see how it flops and flaps? You can hardly hold it. He was going to pull up the chair, as he always did, in order to stand up on it and deliver the victim to the voracious spider in a solid web. The beast was already puffing himself up, sensing the prey, but something went wrong. His gnarled, fearful fingers happened to release the main fold of the towel, and he immediately cried out and cringed as people cry out and cringe whom not a bat, but an ordinary house mouse inspires with revulsion and terror. Something large, dark, and furnished with feelers disengaged itself from the towel, and Rodion emitted a loud yell, tramping in one place, afraid to let the thing escape, but not daring to grab it. The towel fell, and the fair captive clung to Rodion's cuff, clutching it with all 6 of its adhesive feet. It was only a moth, but what a moth! It was as large as a man's hand. It had thick, dark brown wings, with a hoary lining and gray-dusted margins. Each wing was adorned with the center with an eye spot shining like a steel. Its segmented limbs, in fluffy muffs, how clung, now unstuck themselves in the upraised veins of its wings, through whose underside the same staring spots and wavy gray pattern showed. Oscillated slowly as the moth, groping its way, crawled up its sleeve, while Rodion, quite panic-stricken, rolled his eyes. Throwing away and forsaking his own arm, wailed, "Take it off me! Take it off me!" Upon reaching his elbow, the moth began noiselessly flapping his heavy wings. They seemed to outbalance its body, and on Rodion's elbow joint the creature turned over, wings hanging down, still tenaciously clinging to the sleeve, and now one could see its brown, white-dappled abdomen, its squirrel face, the black globules of its eyes, and its feathery antennae resembling pointed ears. "Take it away," implored Rodion, beside himself, and his frantic gesturing caused a splendid insect to fall off. It struck the table, paused on it, mighty vibration, and suddenly took off from its edge. "But to me your daytime is dark. Why did you disturb my slumber?" Its flight, swooping and lumbering, lasted only a short time. Rodion picked up the towel and, swinging wildly, attempted to knock down the blind fire, but suddenly it disappeared as if the very air had swallowed it. Rodion searched for a while, did not find it, and stopped in the center of the cell, turning toward Cincinnatus, arms akimbo. "Eh, what a rascal!" he ejaculated after expressive silence. He spat, he shook his head, and pulled out a throbbing matchbox with spare flies, with which the disappointed animal had to be satisfied. Cincinnatus, however, had seen perfectly well where the moth was settled. When at last Rodion departed, crossly removing his beard together with his shaggy cap of hair, Cincinnatus walked from the cot to the table. He was sorry he had returned all the books, and sat down to write past the time. "Everything has fallen into place," he wrote. "That is, everything has duped me. All of this theatrical, pathetic stuff, the promises of a volatile maiden, a mother's moist gaze, the knocking on the wall, a neighbor's friendliness, and finally those hills which broke out in a deadly rash. Everything has duped me as it fell into place. Everything. This is the dead end of this life. and I should not have thought salvation within its confines. It is strange that I should have sought salvation, just like a man grieving because he has recently lost in his dreams something that he had never had in reality, or hoping that tomorrow he would dream that he had found it again. That is how mathematics is created. It has its fatal flaw. I have discovered it. I have discovered the little crack in life where it broke off, where it had once been soldered to something else, something genuinely alive, important, and vast, and how capacious my epithets must be in order that I may pour them full of crystalline sense. It is best to leave some things unsaid, or else I shall get confused again. Within this irreparable little crack, decay is set in. I think I shall yet be able to express it all. The dreams, coalescence, the disintegration. No, again, I am off the track. All my best words are deserters and do not answer the trumpet call, and the remainder are cripplers. Oh, if only I had known that I was yet to remain here for such a long time, I would have begun at the beginning and gradually along a high road of logically connected ideas would have completed. My soul would have surrounded itself with a structure of words. Everything that I have written here so far is the froth of my excitement, a senseless transport for very reason that I have been in such a hurry. But now when I am hardened, when I am almost fearless of— Here the page ended, and Cincinnatus realized that he was out of paper. However, he managed to dig up one more sheet. Death, he wrote on it, continuing his sentence, but he immediately crossed out the word. He must say it differently, with greater precision. Execution, perhaps. Pain, parting, something like that. Twirling in the stunted pencil in his fingers, he paused in thought, and a little brown fuzz had stuck to the edge of the table, where the moth had quivered only a short time ago, and Cincinnatus, remembering it, walked away from the table, leaving it on the blank sheet with only one solitary word on it, the one crossed out, and bent down, pretending that he was fixing the back of his slipper by the cot, on whose iron leg, quite near the floor, it was settled to sleep on visionary wings spread in solemn, invulnerable torpor. Only he was sorry for the downy back, where the fuzz had rubbed on, leaving a bald spot, as shiny as a chestnut, but the great dark wings with their ashen edges and perpetually open eyes were inviolable. The forewings, lowered slightly, lapped over the hind ones, and this drooping attitude might have been one of somnolent fragility, were it not for the monolithic straightness of the upper margins, and the perfect symmetry of all the diverging lines, and this was so enchanting that Cincinnatus, unable to restrain himself, stroked with his fingertip the hoary ridge near the base of the right wing, then the ridge of the left one. What gentle firmness, with unyielding gentleness! The moth, however, did not awaken. He straightened up, and sighing slightly, moved away, but was about to sit down at the table again, when suddenly the key scraped in the lock, and the door opened, whining, rattling, and groaning, in keeping with all the rules of carceral counterpoint. Rosy Monsieur Pierre, in a pea-green hunting habit, first inserted his head, and then came in completely. Behind him, and came two others, whom it was almost impossible to recognize as the director and the lawyer, haggard, pallid, both dressed up in coarse gray shirts, shabbily shod, without any makeup, without padding and without wigs, with rheumy eyes, with scrawny bodies that one could glimpse through candid ribs. They turned out to resemble each other. And their identical heads moved identically on their thin necks, pale, bald, bumpy heads, and a bluish stipple on the sides and protruding ears. Attractively rouged, Monsieur Pierre bowed, bringing together his patent leather boot tops, and said in a comic falsetto, "The carriage is waiting, if you please, sir." "Where are we going?" asked Cincinnatus, genuinely not understanding at first, so convinced he had been that it must happen at dawn. "Where? Where?" Monsieur Pierre mimicked him. "You know where, off to do the chop-chop." "But we don't have to go this very minute, do we?" asked Cincinnatus, and he was himself surprised at what he was saying. "I haven't quite prepared myself." "Cincinnatus, is that you speaking?" "Yes, this very minute. Good heavens, my friend, you have had nearly 3 weeks to prepare yourself. One would think that's sufficient. These are my assistants, Rod and Rom. Please be kind to them. They may be puny-looking fellows, but they are diligent. We do our best," droned the fellows. "I almost forgot," continued Monsieur Pierre. "According to the law, you are still entitled to— Roman, old boy, would you hand me the list?" Roman, exaggeratedly hurrying, produced from under the lining of his cap a black-bordered card, folded in two. While he was getting it out, Roderick kept mechanically tapping his sides, and seemed to be searching in his breast pockets, without taking his imbecile eyes off his comrade. "For the sake of simplicity," said Monsieur Pierre, "here is a prepared menu of last wishes. You may choose one, and only one. I shall read it aloud. Now then, a glass of wine or a brief trip to the toilet, or a cursory inspection of the prison collection of Prince postcards, or what's this, number 4, composing an address to the director expressing gratitude for his considerate. Well, I never. Roderick, you scoundrel, you have added this yourself. I don't understand how you dared. This is an official document. Why, this is a personal insult, especially when I am so meticulous in regard to the laws, when I try so hard. In his anger, Monsieur Pierre flung the card to the floor. Roderick immediately picked it up, smoothed it out, muttering guiltily, "Don't you worry, it wasn't me. Romka was the joker. I know the regulations. Everything is in order here. All the desires du jour, or else a la carte." "Outrageous, intolerable," Monsieur Pierre was shouting as he paced up and down the cell. "I am not well, and in spite of that I am carrying out my duties. They serve me with soiled fish. They offer me a disgusting whore. They treat me with unheard of disrespect, and then they expect clean work from me. No, sir, enough. The cup of long-suffering has been drained. I simply refuse. Do it yourself. Chop, butcher as best you can. Wreck my instrument." "The public idolizes you," said obsequious Roman. "We beseech you, be calm, maestro. Something was not just right. It was the result of an oversight, a foolish mistake, an overzealous foolish mistake, and only that. So please forgive us." Won't the pet of women, the darling of everyone, put aside that wrathful expression for the smile which he is wont to drive to distraction? That'll do, smooth talker," said Monsieur Pierre, relenting a little. "Anyway, I perform my duty more conscientiously than others I could name. All right, I forgive you, but we still have to decide about that darned last wish." "Well, what have you selected?" he asked Cincinnatus, who had quietly sat down on the cot. Come on, I want to get it over with, and Squeamish doesn't have to look." "To finish writing something," whispered Cincinnatus half questioningly, but then he frowned, straining his thoughts, and suddenly understood that everything had in fact been written already. "I don't understand what he is saying," said Monsieur Pierre. "Perhaps someone understands, but I don't." Cincinnatus raised his head. "Here is what I would like," he spoke clearly. "I ask 3 minutes. Go away for that time, or at least be quiet. Yes, a 3-minute intermission. After that, so be it. I'll act to the end my role of your idiotic production." "Let us compromise at 2½ minutes," said Monsieur Pierre, taking out his thick watch. "Concede half a minute, won't you, friend? You won't? Well, be a robber, then. I agree to it." He leaned against the wall in a relaxed pose. Roman and Roderick followed his example, but Roderick's foot twisted under him, and he nearly fell, casting a panic-stricken look at the maestro. "Shh, you son of a—" Monsieur Pierre hissed. "And anyway, what are you making yourself so comfortable? Hands out of your pockets, look out." Still rumbling, he sat down on the chair. "Rod, I have a job for you. You can gradually begin cleaning up here. Just don't make too much noise." A broom was handed Roderick through the door, and he set to work. First of all, with the end of the broom, he knocked out the whole grating in the recess of the window, and there came a distant, feeble hurrah, as if from an abyss, and the gust of fresh air entered the cell. The sheets of paper flew off the table, and Roderick scuffed them into a corner. Then with the broom he pulled down the thick gray cobweb, and with it the spider, whom he had once nursed with such care. To while away the time, Roman picked up the spider. Crudely but cleverly made, it consisted of a round plush body, with twitching legs made of springs, and there was attached to the middle of its back a long elastic, by the end of which Roman was holding it suspended, moving his head up and down so that the elastic alternately contracted and extended, and the spider rose and fell. Monsieur Pierre cast a sidelong, cold glance at the toy, and Roman, raising his eyebrows, hastily pocketed it. Rod, meanwhile, wanted to pull out the drawer of the table, tugged with all his strength, budged it, and the table split in two. At the same time, the chair on which Monsieur Pierre was seated emitted a plaintive sound. Something gave, and Monsieur Pierre nearly dropped his watch. Plaster began to fall from the ceiling. A crack described a tortuous course across the wall. The cell, no longer needed, was quite obviously disintegrating. 58, 59, 60, counted Monsieur Pierre. "That's all. Up, please. It's a fine day. The ride will be most enjoyable. Anyone else in your place would be in a hurry to start." "Just an instant more. I find it ludicrous and disgraceful that my hands should tremble so, but I can neither stop nor hide it. Yes, they tremble, and that's all. My papers you will destroy, the rubbish you will sweep out, the moth will fly away at night through the broken window, so that nothing of me will remain within these 4 walls, which are already about to crumble. But now dust and oblivion are nothing to me. I feel only one thing, fear, shameful, futile fear." Actually, Cincinnatus did not say all this. He was silently changing his shoes. The vein on his forehead was swollen. The blood locks fell on it. His shirt had a wide-open embroidered collar, which imparted a certain extraordinarily youthful quality to his neck and to his flushed face with its blond quivering mustache. "Let's go!" shrieked Monsieur Pierre. Cincinnatus, trying not to brush against anyone or anything, placing his feet as if he were walking on bare, sloping ice, finally made his way out of the cell, which in fact was no longer there. Cincinnatus was led through some passageways. Now ahead, now behind. A distracted echo would leap out. All its burrows were crumbling. Often there were stretches of darkness because bulbs burned out. Monsieur Pierre demanded that they go in step. Now they were joined by several soldiers in the regulation canine masks, and then Roderick and Roman, with the master's permission, went on ahead, with long, pleased strides, swinging their arms in businesslike fashion and over-talking each other. Shouting, they disappeared around a corner. Cincinnatus, who alas had suddenly lost the capacity of walking, was supported by Monsieur Pierre and a soldier with the face of a bourgeois. For a very long time they clambered up and down the staircases. The fortress must have suffered a mild stroke, as the descending stairs were in reality ascending and vice versa. Again there were long corridors, but of course a more inhabited kind, that is, the visibly demonstrated either by linoleum or by wallpaper or by a sea chest against the wall that they adjoined living quarters. At one bend there was even the smell of cabbage soup. Further on they passed a glass door with the inscription "Fis," and after another period of darkness they abruptly found themselves in the courtyard, vibrant with the noonday sun. Throughout this whole journey, Cincinnatus was busy trying to cope with his choking, wrenching, implacable fear. He realized that this fear was dragging him precisely into that false logic of things that had gradually developed around him, and from which he had still somehow been able to escape that morning. The very thought that this chubby, red-cheeked hunter was going to hack at him was already an inadmissible, sickening weakness, drawing Cincinnatus into a system that was perilous to him. He fully understood all this, but like a man unable to resist arguing with a hallucination, even though he knows perfectly well that the entire masquerade is staged in his own brain, but Cincinnatus tried in vain to outwrinkle his fear, despite his understanding that he ought actually to rejoice at the awakening whose proximity was pre-staged by a barely noticeable phenomena, by the peculiar effects of everyday implements, by a certain general instability, by a certain flaw in all this visible matter. But the sun was still realistic, the world still held together, and objects still observed an outward propriety. Outside the third gate the carriage was waiting. The soldiers did not accompany them further, but sat down on logs piled by the wall and began taking off their cloth masks. The prison staff and the guard families pressed timidly and greedily around the gate. Barefoot children would run out trying to get into the picture, and immediately would dart back, and their kerchiefs mothers would slush them, and the hot light glittered the scattered straw, and there was the odor of warm nettles, while off to one side a dozen geese crowded, gobbling discreetly. "Well, let's get going," Monsieur Pierre said jauntily, and put on his pea-green hat with a pheasant feather. An old scared carriage, which listed with groan, and springy little Monsieur Pierre mounted the step, was hitched to a bay nag with bared teeth, with legions shiny from flies on its sharply protruding haunches, all in all so lean and so ribby that his trunk seemed to be enclosed in a set of hoops. There was a red ribbon on its mane. Monsieur Pierre squeezed over to make room for Cincinnatus and asked if the bulky case was placed at their feet were in his way. "Please, my dear fellow, try not to step on it," he added. Roderick and Roman climbed on the box. Roderick, who was playing the coachman, snapped the long whip. The horse gave a start and was unable to move the carriage immediately, and sank on its haunches. The discordant cheer inopportunely rang from the staff. Rising and leaning forward, Roderick gave the horse's nose a lash, and when the carriage moved spasmodically off, he nearly fell backwards on the box from the jolt, drawing the rein tight and crying, "Whoa! Easy, easy," said Monsieur Pierre with a smile, touching Roderick's back with a plump hand and a smart glove. The pale road coiled several times, with evil picturesqueness, around the base of the fortress. In places the grade was fairly steep, and then Roderick would hastily wind tight the scrunching brake handle, Monsieur Pierre, his hands resting on the bulldog head of his cane, gaily looked around at the cliffs, the green inclines between them, the clover and vines, the whirling white dust, and while he was at it, also caressed with his gaze the profile of Cincinnatus, who was still engaged in his inner struggle. The scrawny, gray, bent backs of two men sitting on the box were perfectly identical. The hoofs clipped and clopped, horseflies circled like satellites. At times the carriage overtook hurrying pilgrims, the prison cook, for instance, with his life. who would stop, shielding themselves from the sun and dust, and then quicken their pace. One more turn, and then the road stretched out toward the bridge, having disentangled itself from the slowly revolving fortress, which already stood quite poorly, and the perspective was disorganized. Something had come loose and dangled. "I'm sorry I flared up like that," Monsieur Pierre was saying gently. "Don't be angry with me, Ducky. You understand yourself how it hurts to see others being sloppy when you put your whole soul into your work." They clattered across the bridge. News of the execution had only just now begun to spread through the town. Red and blue boys ran after the carriage. A man who feigned insanity, an old fellow of Jewish origin, who had for many years been fishing for non-existent fish in a waterless river, was collecting his chatterolls, hurrying to join the very first group of townspeople heading for the Thriller Square. "But there's no point in dwelling on that," Monsieur Pierre was saying. "Men of my temperament are volatile, but also get over it quickly. Rather let us turn our attention to the conduct of the fair sex." Several girls, hatless, jostling, and squealing, were buying up all the flowers at a fat flower vendor. With borrowed breasts, the boldest among them managed to throw a bouquet into the carriage, nearly knocking the cap off Roman's head. Monsieur Pierre shook a finger. The horse, his bleary eye looking askance at the fat, spotted dogs, extending their bodies as they raced at its hoofs, strained up Garden Street. The crowd was already catching up. Another bouquet hit the carriage. Now they were turning right past the huge ruins of an ancient factory, then along Telegraph Street, already ringing, moaning, tooting with the noise of instruments tuning up, and then through the unpaved, whispering lane, past a public garden where two bearded men in civilian dress got up from a bench where they saw the carriage, and gesticulating emphatically, began indicating it to each other, both dreadfully excited, square-shouldered, and now they were running as energetically and angularly, lifting their legs toward the same place as everyone else. Behind the public garden, the corpulent white statue had been split in two by thunderbolt, said the papers. "In a moment we shall be driving past your house," said Monsieur Pierre very softly. Roman began fidgeting on the box and twisting around to Cincinnatus, cried, "In a moment we shall be driving past your house," and at once he turned away again, bouncing up and down like a pleased urchin. Cincinnatus did not want to look, but still he looked. Marthe was sitting in the branches of the barren apple tree, waving a handkerchief, while in the garden next door, among sunflowers and hollyhocks, a scarecrow in a crushed top hat was waving its sleeve. The wall of the house, especially at the spots where leafy shadows had once played, they peeled strangely, part of the roof, but they had driven past. "Really, there is something heartless about you," said Monsieur Pierre with a sigh, and impatiently stuck his cane into the back of the driver, who rose slightly and with frenzied lashings of his whip achieved a miracle. The nag broke into a gallop. Now they were driving along the boulevard. The agitation in the city continued to mount. The motley facades in the house swayed and flopped as they were hastily decorated with welcoming posters. One small house was especially well decked out. Its door opened quickly. A youth came out, and his entire family followed to see him off. This day he had reached execution-attending age. Mother was smiling through her tears. Granny was thrusting a sandwich into his knapsack. Kid brother was handing him his staff. The ancient stone bridges arching above the streets, once such a boon to pedestrians, but now used only by gawkers and street supervisors, were already teeming with photographers. Monsieur Pierre kept tipping his hat. Dandies on their shiny clockwork cycles passed the carriage and craned their necks. A person in Turkish trousers came running out of a cafe with a pail of confetti, but missing sent his various blizzards into the face of a crop fellow who had just come running out for the opposite sidewalk with a bienvenue platter of bread and salt. All that remained of the statue of Captain Solness was the legs up to the hips surrounded by roses. It, too, must have been struck by lightning. Somewhere ahead, a brass hand was scorching away at the March Golbuchik. White clouds moved jerkily across the whole sky. I think the same ones passed over and over again. I think there are only three kinds. I think it is all a stage setting, with a suspicious green tinge. Now, come on, no foolishness," said Monsieur Pierre. "Don't dare start fainting. It's unworthy of a man." Now they had arrived. There were as yet relatively few spectators, but they continued to flow in endlessly. In the center of the plaza, no, not quite the center, that precisely was the dreadful part, rose the vermilion platform of the scaffold. The old electrically powered municipal hearse stood modestly at a slight distance. A combined brigade of telegraphers and firemen was maintaining order. The band was apparently playing with all its might, since the conductor, a one-legged cripple, was waving furiously. Now, however, not a sound was made audible. Monsieur Pierre, raising his plump shoulders, climbed gracefully out of the carriage and immediately turned, wishing to assist Cincinnatus, but Cincinnatus got out from the other side. There was some booing. Roderick and Roman hopped off the box, and all three passed around Cincinnatus. By myself, said Cincinnatus. It was about 20 paces to the scaffold, and in order that no one might touch him, Cincinnatus was compelled to trot. Somewhere in the crowd a dog barked. Upon reaching the crimson steps, Cincinnatus stopped. Monsieur Pierre took him by the elbow. By myself, said Cincinnatus. He mounted to the platform where the block was, that is, a smooth, sloping slab of polished oak of sufficient size so that one could easily lie on it without spread arms. Monsieur Pierre climbed up also. The public buzzed. While they were fussing with the buckets and spreading the sawdust, Cincinnatus, not knowing what to do, leaned against the wooden railing, but a slight tremor was running through all of it, and some curious spectators below started to palpate his ankles. He moved away in a little short of breath, wetting his lips, his arm folded somewhat awkwardly across his chest. As he did it for the first time, he began looking around. Something had happened to the lighting. There was something wrong with the sun, and a section of the sky was shaking. Poplars had been planted around the square, but they were stiff and rickety. One of them was very slowly, but again a buzzing noise passed through the crowd. Roderick and Roman, stumbling, shoving against each other, puffing and grunting, clumsily carried the heavy case up the steps and plunked it down on the board floor. Monsieur Pierre threw off his jacket, remaining clad in a singlet. A turquoise woman was tattooed on his white biceps, while in one of the first rows of the crowd, which was pressing around the very scaffold, regardless of the firemen's entreaties, stood the same woman in the flesh, and also her two sisters, as well as the little old man with the fishing rod, and the tanned flower woman, and the youth with his staff, and one of Cincinnatus's brothers-in-law, and the librarian reading a newspaper, and that stout fellow, Nikita Lukich, the engineer. And Cincinnatus also noticed a man who he used to meet every morning on the way to kindergarten, but whose name he did not know. Beyond the first rows there followed other rows, where eyes and mouths were not so clearly drawn, and beyond them there were layers of very heavy, hazy, and in other haziness, identical faces, and then the furthest ones were really quite badly daubed on the backdrop. Other poplar fell. Suddenly the band stopped, or rather, now that it stopped, one realized that it had been playing all this time. One of the musicians, plump and placid, taking apart his instrument, shook the saliva out of its shiny joints. Beyond the orchestra was a limp green allegorical prospect, a portico, cliffs, a soapy cascade. Nimbly and energetically, so that Cincinnatus involuntarily recoiled, the deputy city director jumped up on the platform, and casually placing one high-raised foot on the block, he was master of a relaxed eloquence, proclaimed in a loud voice, "Townspeople, one brief remark. Lately in our streets a tendency has been observed on the part of certain individuals of the younger generation to walk so fast that the youngsters must move aside and step into puddles. I would also like to say that after tomorrow a furniture exhibit will open at the corner of First Boulevard and Brigadier Street, and I sincerely hope to see you all there. I also remind you that tonight there will be given with sensational success the new comic opera, Socrates Must Decrease. I have also been asked to tell you that the Kiffer Distributing Center has received a large selection of ladies' belts, and the offer may not be repeated. Now I make way for other performers of hope, townspeople, that you are all in good health and lack nothing." Sliding with the same nimbleness between the cross-pieces of the railing, he jumped down from the platform to the accompaniment of an approbatory murmur. Monsieur Pierre, who had already put in a white apron, from under which his jack-boot showed, was carefully wiping his hands on a towel and calmly, benevolently looking around. As soon as the deputy director had finished, he tossed the towel to his assistants and stepped over to Cincinnatus. The square black snouts of the photographers swayed and froze still. "No excitement, no fuss, please," said Monsieur Pierre. "We shall first of all remove our little shirt." "By myself," said Cincinnatus. "That's the boy. Take the little shirt away, men. Now I shall show you how to lie down." Monsieur Pierre dropped onto the block. The audience buzzed. "Is this clear?" asked Monsieur Pierre, springing up and straightening his apron. And it had come apart at the back. Roderick helped tie it. "Good, let's begin. The light was a bit harsh. Perhaps you could— There, that's fine, thank you. Perhaps just a wee bit more. Excellent. Now I shall ask you to lie down." By myself," said Cincinnatus, and lay face down as he had been shown, but at once he covered the back of his neck with his hands. "What a silly boy," said Monsieur Pierre from above. "If you do that, how can I— Yes, give it here, then, immediately after the bucket. And anyway, why all this contraction of muscles? There must be no tension at all, perfectly at ease. Remove your hands, please. Give it to me now, but quite at ease, and count aloud." "To 10, said Cincinnatus. What was that, my friend? Said Monsieur Pierre, as if asking him to repeat, and softly added, already beginning to heave, "Step back a little, gentlemen." "To 10," repeated Cincinnatus, spreading out his arms. "I am not doing anything yet," said Monsieur Pierre, with an extraneous note of gasping effort. The shadow of the swing was already running along the boards when Cincinnatus began counting loudly and firmly. One Cincinnatus was counting, but the other Cincinnatus had already stopped heeding the sound of the unnecessary count which was fading away in the distance, and with a clarity he had never experienced before, and almost painful, so suddenly did it come, but then suffusing him with joy. He reflected, "Why am I here? Why am I lying like this?" And having asked himself these simple questions, he answered them by getting up and looking around. All around there was a strange confusion. Through the headsman's still swinging hips the railing showed. On the steps the pale librarian sat doubled up, vomiting. The spectators were quite transparent and quite useless, and they all kept surging and moving away. Only the black rows, being painted rows, remained in place. Cincinnatus slowly descended from the platform and walked off through the shifting debris. He was overtaken by Roman, who was now many times smaller, and who was at the same time Roderick. "What are you doing?" he croaked, jumping up and down. You can't, it's dishonest toward him, toward everybody. Come back, lie down. After all, you were lying down. Everybody was ready, everybody was finished." Cincinnatus brushed him aside, and he, with a bleak cry, ran off, already thinking of his own safety. Little was left of the square. The platform had long since collapsed in a cloud of reddish dust. The last to rush past a woman in a black shawl, carrying the tiny executioner like a larva in her arms. The fallen trees lay flat and reliefless, while those that were still standing, also two-dimensional, with the lateral shading of the trunk to suggest roundness, barely held on with their branches to the ripping mesh of the sky. Everything was coming apart, everything was falling. A spinning wind was picking up and whirling dust, rags, chips of painted wood, bits of gilded plaster, pasteboard bricks, posters, and arid gloom fleeted. And amidst the dust and the falling things, the flapping scenery, Cincinnatus made his way in the direction where, to judge by the voices, stood beings akin to him. About the author. Vladimir Nabokov was born in St. Petersburg on April 23, 1899. His family fled to Crimea in 1917 during the Bolshevik Revolution, then went to exile in Europe. Nabokov studied in Trinity College, Cambridge, earning a degree in French and Russian literature in 1922, and lived in Berlin and Paris for the next 2 decades, writing prolifically mainly in Russian under the pseudonym Sirin. In 1940 he moved to the United States, where he pursued a brilliant literary career as a poet, novelist, memoirist, critic, and translator while teaching Russian creative writing and literature at Stanford, Wellesley, Cornell, and Harvard. The monumental success of his novel Lolita in 1955 enabled him to give up teaching and devote himself fully to his writing. In 1961, he moved to Montreux, Switzerland, where he died in 1977, recognized as one of the master prose stylists of the century in both Russian and English. He translated a number of his original English works, including Lolita, into Russian, and collaborated on English translations of his original Russian works. Thank you for listening to The Invitation to Beheading by Vladimir Nabokov. Let me know what was your favorite part of the book. I love a lot of moments from the book, and it's hard for me to pick one. There are a lot of just insanely funny things. For one thing, just when it's mentioned what his crime actually was by being opaque, that itself is just absolutely hilarious to me. But also the spider. I love the thing of the spider not being real after all. Like, just so many weird things throughout the book of things just not being real that you think are real. Let me know in the comments what, if anything, in particular was interesting to you, what your favorite parts were.